Okay, welcome back to Peak by Roland Smith. We're at chapter 15. It's called the Gamoff Bag. I think I'm saying that right. Um, Here is the question I want you to think about. What does the chapter about a Gamoff bag add to the story? Does it change the tone or the mood at all? I know it's spelled G-A-M-O-W, but I think it's Gamoff, like with O-F-F. So think about this chapter and think about if this changes the tone or the mood of this story at all. All right, chapter 15. I made it as far as the HQ tent, but no further that night. The storm dumped about 4 feet of snow on base camp. It was much worse up at ABC. Josh managed to get through on the radio only during the night. It was scratchy and broken up, but we think he said there were sustained winds of 73 miles an hour and gusts of over 100. The team members were hunkered down in their tents, but there was no way for Josh to check on them because of the weather. At first light, he dug out and reported in again. Base, we're all accounted for, but we have 2 cases of HAPE. Francis and Bill, one severe, one mild. How's the weather down there? Clear, the radio operator, Sparky, answered. I just checked the meteorological maps and there's nothing new coming in till tonight. When? Storm's ETA is 1900, give or take several hours. Josh gave a harsh laugh, followed by a coughing fit. When he finally recovered, he said, I hear you on the weather window. I'll start everyone down as soon as we get them rehydrated. We're giving Bill extra O's and he's responding well. I think he'll be able to make it down on his own. Leah and I will follow behind him with Francis and a couple Sherpas. We'll give Bill a hand if he needs it. We're trying to get Francis into the Gamoff bag. Francis was the guy who grunted at the noodles. A Gamoff bag, produced Gamoff, was invented by Igor Gamoff in the late 1980s and had saved a lot of climbers from dying of HAPE. It's like an airtight body bag. At high altitudes, the air pressure is extremely low. You zip the victim inside the Gamoff bag, pump it full of air until it's about the same pressure as it would be at sea level, and bingo, the climber can breathe again. Hopefully. We'll start looking for the first climbers in about 8 hours then, Sparky said. Be careful coming down. Avalanche risk is high. Keep us posted on the weather. Roger. I dug my tent out of the snow. Then Zopa asked Sunjo and me to dig out Holly's tent, which took us hours. She didn't help us, but she did keep us supplied with hot tea and cookies. Late that afternoon, the first of our team members started to straggle in, looking like zombies from the night of the living dead. It took them each 3 mugs of steaming sweet tea in the mess tent before they were finally able to put a coherent sentence together. It was a nightmare. The snow started 1,000 feet below ABC. It was so thick we had to fix a rope and tie ourselves together so we didn't lose anyone. We couldn't see a bloody thing past your eyelashes. Then it really started snowing. 22 below at ABC without the wind chill. We nearly froze to death trying to keep our tents up. The guys talking gingerly pulled the glove off his right hand. 3 fingers were discolored and blistered. Krieger says, I'll keep the digits, but the little toe on my left foot is going to slough off in about a week. Never liked that toe anyway, and he laughed. But it wasn't a merry sound. I'd show it to you, but it would just make you sick. The blizzard wasn't the worst of it. Another climber said, not by a far sight. He was a cowboy from Abilene, Texas. An avalanche hit us at about 2 in the morning. Sounded like the biggest dang stampede you ever heard. Wiped out 7 tents. Didn't lose a soul, thank the Lord, but we had to double and triple up in the remaining tents like sardines. Then the food ran out, the man with the frostbitten finger said. Josh only had us bring enough for the trip up and back. This morning there wasn't a raisin to eat between us. We're lucky it cleared up. A couple more days and we would have starved to death. You're right about that, partner, the Texan agreed. When I crawled out this morning, I was eyeing one of them yaks with murder in my heart. Guess we should have had that dang puja ceremony before we started up the hill. Where's Josh, I asked. Him and Krieger are still hauling Francis down, the Texan drawled. They didn't leave till late, from what I hear. Turns out Francis is claustrophobic. Should have guessed it. He's always sleeping with half his head outside his tent door. He about went plumb crazy when they zipped him into that bag. The only thing that saved him was that he passed out after a bit. You might be thinking that the above conversation was a little cold-hearted, and you'd be right. It was 10 below zero outside, slightly warmer in the mess tent, but not by much. When you are exhausted, having a hard time catching your breath, freezing, starving, waiting for your little toe to drop off, You have other things on your mind than the welfare of your fellow climbers. Zopa waved Sunjo and me over to him and told us to get our gear. We were going up the mountain to help Josh and Leah. JR, Will, and Jack joined us. They had been filming our climbing lessons with Zopa the past few days, and I wasn't sure they were coming with us to help or to get footage of the Gamoff bag in action. I didn't think 1,000 feet would make that much of a difference, but at that altitude, even 100 feet made a difference. Having to plow through freshly fallen snow didn't help. About every 20 steps, I stopped, sucking in ragged breaths of freezing air. At this stage, my hope of getting to the summit, 1.5 miles above where I currently was suffocating, seemed about as likely as me flying a Gamoff bag to Jupiter. My only consolation was that Sunjo and the film crew were having as much trouble as I was. The one person who wasn't affected was Zopa. He'd wait for us until we were about 50 yards behind him, then he'd continue up Wrongbook Glacier like a mountain goat breaking the trail. By late afternoon, there was still no sign of Josh and others. If we didn't find them soon, we'd be searching in the dark, but even worse, clouds were starting to come in. Zopa let us catch up to him just as the sun started slipping behind the mountain. Maybe they're spending the night at Camp 2 or Intermediate Camp, JR suggested between gasps. There are 2 camps on the way up to ABC, an Intermediate Camp and Camp 2, which lie 3/4 of the way up to ABC. The Intermediate Camp was nowhere in sight, which meant we weren't nearly as far up the mountain as it felt. And if they are not at the Intermediate Camp or Camp 2, Zopa asked, meaning if Josh and Dr. Krieger had passed the camps or had reached them yet, they could freeze to death. Good point, JR conceded. What should we do? Zopa looked down the glacier, then he squinted up at the darkening sky. A storm is coming, he said. You can get down to base camp in 1.5 hours, maybe 2 hours. If you leave now, you can beat it. JR gave him a skeptical look. We've been climbing for over 4 hours now. Downhill, Zopa said, by way of explanation. The trail is broken. Don't wander off it. What about you? I asked. He pulled his headlamp out of his pack and he strapped it around his parka hood. Then he started to slip his pack back on. I know your father. He will not watch that man die. He will try to get him off the mountain. I think all of us wanted to go back down to base camp. Ooh, I know I did. But none of us wanted to go down without Zopa, especially with the bad weather moving in. We put on our headlamps and we followed Zopa's light. 2 hours later, in the dark, with the snow beginning to fall, we spotted 2 headlamps flickering a few hundred yards above us. Josh and Leah looked completely done in. I don't think they would have made it much further on their own, and I don't know who was happier to see who. They were happy we were there to help get Francis down, and we were happy to find them because it meant we got to go down. Did you bring O's? Josh asked, kind of slurring his words. Zopa pulled an oxygen tank and a mask out of his pack. Josh cranked up the regulator and handed it to Leah, who took in several deep lungfuls. Josh was next. When he finished, he offered it to us, but we all bravely shook our heads. We hadn't been up as long or as high as he and Leah, and the only reason they took hits was because they were exhausted. Climbers usually didn't start sucking O's until they got to Camp 5. Zopa pointed to the bag. How is he? Alive. At least the last time we looked. But he has HAPE bad. JR pointed his headlamp at the transparent window on the top of the bag, but it was too fogged up to see inside. You still with us, Francis? Josh shouted. I thought I heard a muffled reply, but it was hard to tell in the howling wind. He's writing a message, Leah said. We stared at the feeble backward S-E-Y, which appeared in the condensation on the window, spelling yes. Josh managed to laugh, then looked at Leah. Should we let him out? She shook her head. You're the doctor. He squatted and he got closer to the bag. Help has arrived, Francis. We'll have you down to base camp soon. Soon turned out to be 4 more hours. The glacier was steep and icy. We had to place ice screws and lower the bag on ropes a few feet at a time so it didn't take off like a toboggan. We stumbled into base camp long after midnight. The camp was usually lit up like a Christmas tree with blue, red, and green tent lights, but this late, most of the climbers were asleep. We hauled the Gamoff bag into the aid tent and laid it on a cot. Leah pulled off her outer and inner thermal gloves with her teeth, then she slowly unzipped the bag. How are you feeling? She asked. Francis was the color of a corpse. He blinked his eyes open and managed to give a weak smile. He whispered, I'm not claustrophobic anymore. Leah smiled and put a stethoscope to his chest. But you still have HAPE. I'm not going to the summit? Not this year, Josh said, looking just as disappointed as Francis. He had another opening on his his climbing permit. We left Francis and Leah and went into the mess tent. A handful of team, staff, and Sherpas were still up drinking tea and playing cards. Josh reported on Francis's condition. When he finished, he asked how Bill was. Not too good, the Texan answered. He doesn't want to go back up. Josh swore. Another climber down, and no one had climbed higher than ABC yet. The mess tent cleared out pretty fast after that, leaving me, Sanjo, Zopa, and Sparky. It felt good to drink hot tea and to breathe and to have air actually fill my lungs. I felt like I was sitting in an oxygen tent, not a mess tent. Peake and Miss Angelo need to get up to ABC, Zopa said. I know, Josh said. I was going to take them and the film crew up when I got back, but I'll have to wait a few days. Now, I'm wiped. I'll take them all up tomorrow, Zopa offered. I couldn't even imagine waking up the glacier in a few hours, but I couldn't protest in front of Josh and Zopa. I wished that JR, Will, and Jack hadn't headed to their tents after filming Francis being freed from the gamoff bag. If they had been there to hear Zopa's suggestion, I'm sure they would have protested for me. I couldn't ask you to do that, Josh said. You didn't ask me, Zopa said. I offered. They need to go up. The weather will break in a few hours. Yeah, well, not according to the satellite maps I just looked at, Sparky said. Zopa shrugged. The maps are wrong. What about Holly, Josh asked. I had a doctor from another camp look at her earlier today, Zopa answered. She can go. Josh grinned. So you already had this figured out before you came up to get me? Zopa just ignored the comment. We will take some of the porters and yaks, he said. Resupply what was lost in the storm. There are some Sherpas I would like to visit at ABC before I leave the mountain. Did you talk to Pa Seng? Pa Seng was Josh's sirdar, who I had seen around camp, but had never officially met. He was constantly rushing around, yelling at the porters, arguing with Sherpas, or in the HQ tent talking to the base camp crew. He had the porters pack what was needed. This afternoon, Zopa answered. Josh looked at me. Are you ready for 21,000 feet? I said I was, but I had some serious doubts. I hoped Zopa was wrong about the weather. Okay, so that's chapter 15. Again, here's your question. What does the chapter about a gamoff bag add to this story? Does it change the tone or the mood at all? So tell me what you think about that. All right.